The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive dome made of crystal and steel. Hundreds of seats lined the circular walls, each one filled with representatives from different worlds across the galaxy. Some were tall and thin, others were short and covered in scales. Some breathed oxygen while others needed special masks. But today, all of them sat in tense silence. Giwan stood near the back of the human delegation section, her hands clasped behind her back. She was young for a diplomat, barely 30 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. This was her first major council meeting, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. Beside her stood Ambassador Hyun, a man in his late 70s with silver hair and a face that showed decades of difficult negotiations. He looked calm, almost bored, as the Vorthan Prime spoke. KVA stood at the center podium, its insectoid body towering over the speaking platform. His species, the Vorthans, looked like a mixture of mantis and beetle, with hard black shells and multiple arms. His voice came out harsh and clicking through the translation device. He was addressing the entire council, but his 4 eyes were fixed on the human section. The humans claimed 12 worlds in the disputed sectors, Kavis said, his mandibles clicking with what might have been laughter. These worlds are wasted on them. They build small colonies and farm the land like primitive creatures. The Vorthan Collective will take these worlds and use them properly. We give the humans 30 days to evacuate. If they do not leave, we will remove them by force. Giwan felt her jaw tighten. She glanced at Ambassador Hin, expecting him to stand up and protest. But the old man just sat there, his expression unchanged. Around the chamber, other alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few whispered to each other. Nobody spoke up in support of KVA's, but nobody defended humanity either. KVA's continued his speech, growing bolder with each passing moment. Humans hide behind words and treaties. They are soft creatures who fear real power. The Vorthan Collective has conquered 40 systems in the last century. We have the strongest fleet in this sector. What do the humans have? Trading ships and empty threats. This time Jiwan couldn't stay quiet. She leaned forward to stand, but Ambassador Haeon placed a gentle hand on her arm. He shook his head slowly. His eyes told her to wait, to watch, to learn. Giwan forced herself to sit back down, even though anger burned in her chest. The council meeting dragged on for another hour. Various ambassadors discussed trade agreements and border disputes, but everyone seemed distracted. The Vorthan ultimatum hung over the chamber like a dark cloud. When the session finally ended, the delegates filed out in small groups. Speaking in hushed tones, G1 walked beside Ambassador Hayen through the curved corridors of the station. The walls here were transparent, showing the vast emptiness of space and the distant stars. She wanted to ask him why he hadn't responded to KVA's, why he had let the Vorthan insult humanity without consequence. But before she could speak, a figure stepped out from a side passage. The alien was tall and covered in dark green scales. His species was reptilian, with a long face and golden eyes that seemed ancient and sad. Gyuan recognized him as one of the council members, though she couldn't remember his name or his world. The reptilian glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure they were alone. Ambassador Hyun, the reptilian said, his voice soft and respectful. I am Thresh. We have not spoken before, but I wanted to offer you a warning. Hyun stopped walking and turned to face Thresh fully. His expression remained neutral, but Jiwan noticed a slight shift in his posture. He was paying very close attention. The Vorthans are serious about their threat, Thresh continued. Their fleet is already moving into position. They believe you will surrender the colonies without a fight. They think humans are peaceful because you are weak. He paused, his golden eyes flicking between Haeon and Jiwan. But I know better. I wanted to warn you, and perhaps to warn them, though I doubt they would listen to me. Why would you warn us? Jiwan asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Your people have no alliance with humanity. Thresh looked at her with an expression that might have been pity or regret. Because I am old enough to remember, he said quietly. I remember what happened to the last species that challenged humanity. I remember the Calrix Empire. The name meant nothing to Juan. She had never heard it in any of her diplomatic training or history lessons. But when she looked at Ambassador Hune, she saw something she had never seen before. The old man's calm facade cracked just slightly. His eyes grew darker, and his mouth formed a thin line. "That was a long time ago," Hune said softly. "Not long enough," Thresh replied. "Not for those of us who were there." He bowed his head slightly to both of them. "I hope the Vorthons withdraw their ultimatum. I truly do, because if they do not, the galaxy will witness that terror again." With those cryptic words, Thresh turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Gi-Yuan watched him go, her mind racing with questions. When she turned back to Hune, the ambassador was already walking toward their shuttle bay. "Sir," Gi-Yuan called out, hurrying to catch up with him. What did he mean? What is the Calrix Empire? Why haven't I heard about it? Han was silent for a long moment. They reached the shuttle bay and stepped inside the small craft that would take them back to the human embassy station. Only when the doors sealed and they were alone did Han finally speak. "The Calrix Empire," he said slowly, settling into his seat, was the dominant power in this region of space. They ruled over 18 species and controlled hundreds of worlds. They had the most advanced military technology and the most powerful fleet ever assembled. He looked out the window as the shuttle began to move, his eyes distant with memory. They were unstoppable, until they met us. Gi-Yuan sat down across from him, her full attention locked on his words. What happened to them? Hune turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something dangerous in his eyes. Something that reminded her that humans had not always been peaceful diplomats and traders. "It's time you learned why the galaxy fears us," Hune said quietly. "Even when they pretend not to." Shuttle ride back to the embassy felt longer than usual. Gi-Yuan sat across from Ambassador Han, waiting for him to continue his story. The old man stared out the window at the passing stars, his fingers drumming slowly on the armrest. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old memories. "I was 24 years old when humanity first encountered the Calrix Empire," Hune began. "It was 18 years ago. In 2298, we had only been traveling between stars for about 40 years back then. We were excited, curious, eager to meet other intelligent species and learn from them." Ji-Wan leaned forward slightly. She knew this part of human history, but only the basic facts. Humanity's early expansion into space, the establishment of colonies, the first contact with alien civilizations. But the name Calrix had never appeared in any of her studies. "We built a colony on a world we called New Sol," Huyan continued. "It was a beautiful planet, with blue oceans and green forests. Over 200,000 people lived there. Farmers, engineers, teachers, children. They were building a new home far from Earth." His voice grew quieter. "I was one of them. I worked as an engineer, designing water systems and power grids. The shuttle passed through a field of distant asteroids, their shadows flickering across Han's face. Gi-Wan remained silent, sensing that interrupting would break whatever had loosened his tongue. "Then the Calrix arrived," Hune said. "Their ships appeared in orbit without warning. Massive vessels, each one larger than anything we had ever built. They sent a message to New Sol and to Earth. The message was simple. Submit to the Calrix Empire immediately, or be destroyed." "What did we do?" Juan asked softly. "Earth sent diplomats," Hune replied with a bitter smile. "They tried to negotiate, to explain that humanity wanted peace, that we could find a way to coexist. The Calrix Emperor, a creature named Thane, listened to the diplomats for exactly 1 hour. Then he gave his response." Hyan's hands clenched into fists on the armrests. Even after all these years, Gi-Wan could see the anger and pain in his eyes. Thane ordered his fleet to bombard New Sol from orbit. Not a military strike. Not a targeted attack. Complete destruction. The bombardment lasted for 6 hours. When it was over, nothing was left alive on the surface. 200,000 people gone in a single day. Guan felt her blood run cold. How did you survive? Hyun said flatly. I was on a transport shuttle, bringing supplies from the outer settlements, when the attack began. We watched from space as our home burned. The Calrics let us go. They wanted survivors to carry the message back to Earth. They wanted humanity to know what happens to those who refuse the Empire. The shuttle docked at the embassy station with a soft thump, but neither of them moved to leave. Hyun seemed lost in the past now, his voice steady but hollow. The Calrics expected Earth to surrender immediately, he continued. Every other species in their empire had done exactly that. The Empire had stood for 800 years. 18 different species bowed to them after the Calrics demonstrated their power. But humanity did not bow. We declared war, Jiwon said. Total war, Hyun corrected. Every nation on Earth united for the first time in human history. Every resource, every factory, every scientist and soldier focused on one single goal: the destruction of the Calrics Empire. Giwon tried to imagine it. Humanity had been so young back then, so new to space travel. Going to war against an empire that had conquered 18 species seemed impossible, suicidal even. The first year was terrible, Han said. The Calrics had better weapons, better ships, better technology in every way. They crushed our fleets in every major battle. We lost colonies, stations, thousands of ships. Earth itself was nearly invaded twice. He paused. But the Calrics didn't understand something crucial about humanity. What was that? We learned, Han said simply. After every defeat, we studied what went wrong. We adapted. We changed our tactics. We improved our technology. The Calrics had been fighting the same way for centuries, because it always worked. But humanity had spent thousands of years fighting each other on Earth. War is in our history, in our blood, in our culture. We know how to lose battles and still win wars. Hyun stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. A woman named Minji became one of our greatest heroes during those early years. She was a cargo ship captain before the war, transporting supplies between colonies. When the war started, she volunteered to fight. They gave her an old converted freighter with barely any weapons. What did she do? Juan asked. She won, Hyun said with a slight smile. Mingi developed new tactics that our military had never considered. She used the cargo ship's speed and maneuverability against the larger Calrics warships. She pioneered hit-and-run attacks, ambush strategies, psychological warfare. The Calrics called her the Ghost because she would appear, destroy their ships, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. Guan had heard stories of legendary human commanders from various wars throughout history, but never from the early space age. This entire piece of history had been hidden from her, and she wondered why. By the third year of the war, we were holding our ground, Heen continued. By the fourth year, we were winning battles. Our scientists reverse-engineered Calrics technology and improved it. Our factories built new weapons that even the Empire had never imagined. And our soldiers, our captains, our commanders, all fought with a determination the Calrics had never encountered. What did the Calrics do when they realized they were losing? They became desperate, Hyun said. Emperor Thane sent more ships, more troops, more resources. He couldn't understand how a young species could match his ancient empire. His generals started reporting something that terrified them. They said humans didn't fight like civilized beings. We used ramming attacks, suicide drones, biological weapons, anything and everything that could hurt the enemy. We broke every rule of warfare that the galaxy considered sacred. Guan felt a chill run down her spine. She had grown up in a peaceful era where humanity was known for diplomacy and trade. Hearing about this brutal side of her species felt alien and disturbing. By year 6, human forces were pushing into Calrics territory, Hyun said. Captain Minji had become Admiral Minji, leading entire fleets. We captured Calrics worlds one by one. Their subject species saw us winning and began to revolt, sensing weakness in their masters for the first time in centuries. And then, Hyun turned away from the window to face Giwon directly. His expression was hard, carved from stone. Then we did what the Calrics had done to us. We showed them the price of challenging humanity. We moved from the shuttle to Hyan's private office in the embassy. The room was simple, decorated with only a few personal items and a large window overlooking the void of space. Giwan sat down while Hyan poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on his desk. His hands were steady, but she noticed the distant look in his eyes that suggested he was seeing things from long ago. The turning point came in 2303, Han said, settling into his chair. Admiral Doyon took command of the entire human fleet. He was brilliant, ruthless, and completely dedicated to ending the war. Under his leadership, we stopped just defending ourselves. We went on the offensive. Jiwan sipped her water, listening carefully. The name Doyon sounded familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. Perhaps it had appeared in some forgotten history file. The Calrix Empire had ruled for 800 years because they were strong and organized, Hyan explained. They had a clear command structure, established battle formations, and traditional military doctrine. These things made them powerful against conventional enemies. But humans are not conventional. What did Admiral Doyon do differently? Everything, Hyun replied with a grim smile. He threw out every rule of space combat that existed. In one battle, he ordered our ships to shut down their engines and drift like debris. When the Calrix fleet approached to investigate, thinking we had malfunctioned, we powered up and attacked from point-blank range. In another engagement, he had our ships broadcast surrender signals while actually preparing to ram the enemy vessels at full speed. Guan felt uncomfortable hearing these tactics. They seemed dishonest, underhanded. But she reminded herself that this was war, and the Calrix had started it by destroying New Sol. There was a scientist named Somi En-hoon continued. She led a research team that studied every piece of Calrix technology we could capture. The Calrix had better shields, better weapons, better everything. But Salman found weaknesses. She discovered that their shields operated on a specific frequency. Our scientists developed weapons tuned to that exact frequency. Suddenly, their greatest defense became useless. They must have adapted, Juan said. They tried, Han acknowledged. But that's the difference. It took the Calrix months to adjust their shield frequencies across their entire fleet. It took us weeks to develop new weapons for their updated shields. We moved faster, thought faster, changed faster. Evolution in real time. Hyun stood and walked to his window, looking out at the stars. One of the most important battles happened at a place called the Vermilion Nebula. The Calrix had a massive shipyard there, producing new vessels for their fleet. Admiral Doyon led an attack with 200 ships against a force 3 times that size. How did he win? He didn't try to win fairly, Hayan said bluntly. Admiral Minji commanded one wing of the attack, drawing the Calrix defense fleet away from the shipyard. While they were distracted, Doyon's main force punched through their lines. But instead of attacking the shipyard with weapons, he had his ships filled with explosives. They rammed directly into the shipyard at maximum speed. Guan's eyes widened. That's suicide. The crews evacuated 2 small shuttles at the last moment, Hayan explained. Most of them survived, but the shipyard was completely destroyed, along with 70 Calrix warships that were under construction. It set their fleet production back by years. She tried to imagine the desperation and courage required for such an attack. The people who volunteered for those missions knew they might not make it back. They did it anyway, driven by the memory of New Sol and countless other human colonies that had fallen to Calrix aggression. The Calrix General Vex started sending reports to Emperor Thane, Hyun said. We captured some of these communications later. Vex warned that humans were unlike any enemy the Empire had faced. He said we adapted too quickly, fought too dirty, and never accepted defeat even when we were losing. He recommended making peace, while the Empire still had strength. What did Emperor Thane say? He executed General Vex for cowardice, Hyun replied coldly. Thane could not accept that a young species was matching his ancient empire. Pride and arrogance blinded him to reality. He kept sending more ships, more troops, convinced that eventually human determination would break. Juan thought about the current situation with the Vorthans. KVAs showed the same arrogance, the same certainty that humanity would back down. He had no idea what history he was repeating. By 2304, human forces were advancing on multiple fronts, Hyun continued. We had captured or destroyed most of the Calric's outer colonies. Their subject species were in full revolt, seeing that the Empire could bleed. Admiral Doyon prepared for the final campaign, the Calric's homeworld, Juwon said quietly. Hyun nodded. Emperor Thane finally tried to negotiate. He offered to recognize human independence, to pay reparations, to establish borders. But humanity had learned a lesson from the Calric's themselves. You don't negotiate with those who only understand strength. What were our terms? Complete military disarmament, Hyun said. The Calric's would be allowed to keep their homeworld and a handful of colonies. But they would destroy every warship, every weapon, every military installation. They would pay massive reparations. They would free all their subject species immediately. And they would accept human observers to ensure compliance. Thane refused, Jiwon guessed. He called it humiliation, Han confirmed. He chose to fight to the end, believing that defending their homeworld would rally the Calric's people and somehow turn the tide. It was the worst decision he ever made. The office fell silent for a moment. Gyun could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems, the distant clang of metal on metal somewhere in the corridors. She waited for Han to continue, knowing that the hardest part of the story was coming. The assault on the Calric's homeworld lasted 3 days, Hyun said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Admiral Doyen commanded a fleet of 5,000 ships. The Calric's defense force numbered 8,000. It should have been their advantage. But we had superior tactics, and weapons they couldn't defend against. What happened? We won, Hyun said simply. Admiral Minji led the first wave, breaking their orbital defenses. Admiral Doyon followed with the main attack, destroying their remaining fleet in detail. By the end of the first day, the Calric's had lost control of their own sky. By the end of the second day, their ground defenses were shattered. By the end of the third day, Emperor Thane was dead, and the Empire had fallen. Giwon sat back in her chair, processing the information. An 800-year-old empire destroyed in 6 years. The dominant military power in the sector, crushed by a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. What happened to the Calric's people? She asked. They scattered, Hyun replied. Without their military and their emperor, the empire collapsed completely. All 18 subject species declared independence. The Calric's homeworld was devastated by the war. Most of their people fled to other worlds, becoming refugees, traders, merchants. They lost everything, like Thresh Guan realized. He's Calric's, isn't he? Hyun nodded slowly. One of the few who lived through the war. That's why he warned us about the Vorthans. He knows what happens when someone challenges humanity. The next morning, Jiwon found it difficult to focus on her regular duties. She kept thinking about the story Hyun had told her, about the Calric's empire, and the war that had been hidden from common knowledge. She understood now why the other species at the council grew quiet when the Vorthons threatened humanity. They all knew the story that she had only just learned. During her break, she returned to Hyun's office. The ambassador was reviewing reports on his desk, but he looked up when she entered and gestured for her to sit. You have questions, he said. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Why doesn't anyone talk about the Calric's War? Giwon asked directly. This was a major event in human history, but I never learned about it in school or in diplomatic training. Why is it hidden? Hyun set down his tablet and leaned back in his chair. It's not hidden exactly. The information exists in historical archives, but we don't advertise it. We don't talk about it at the council. We don't remind other species about what happened. But why not? It proves that humanity can defend itself. It proves more than that, Hyun said quietly. It proves that humanity can be terrifying when provoked. After the war ended, the galaxy looked at us differently. They saw a young species that had destroyed an ancient empire in just 6 years. They saw tactics and weapons that violated every civilized rule of warfare. They saw determination that bordered on madness. Juan thought about this. They became afraid of us. Terrified, Hyun corrected. And fear breeds respect, but it also breeds distance. After the Calric's War, other species were hesitant to form alliances with us. They worried that any dispute might escalate into violence. so humanity made a choice. We decided to let the story fade into the background. We focused on being peaceful, on diplomacy, on trade. We wanted to be known for building rather than destroying. But the story never completely disappeared, Juan said. No, Yoon agreed. The older species remember. They whisper about it to each other when they think humans aren't listening. The Calric survivors tell their children and grandchildren about what happened to their empire. It's like a ghost story that travels through the galaxy. Don't provoke the humans. Don't threaten them. Remember what happened to the Calrics. Stood and walked to the window, looking out at the space station's busy docks. Ships from dozens of different species came and went, trading goods and sharing information. It all seemed so peaceful, so civilized. Hard to believe that such violence existed in humanity's recent past. The Vorthines don't know this story, she said. They're young, Hian replied. Their civilization only achieved spaceflight about 200 years ago. They've been expanding aggressively ever since, conquering smaller species and taking what they want.
Oh.
They've never encountered real resistance. They think strength is all that matters, like the Calrics thought. Exactly like the Calrics thought. A soft chime interrupted their conversation. Heian checked his tablet, and his expression grew serious. There's an emergency council session in 1 hour. The Vorthins have made another announcement. They arrived at the council chamber early. The massive room was already filling with delegates, all of them talking in hushed voices. Juan noticed that many of them kept glancing at the human delegation with expressions that ranged from concern to pity. She realized they were wondering if they were about to witness another Calric situation. Thresh, the old Calric survivor, sat in his designated seat near the back. When he saw Juan, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. His golden eyes held. The sadness of someone who had seen this pattern before and knew how it would end. Kavis entered the chamber with his usual arrogance. The Vorthin Prime climbed onto the central podium, his insectoid body clicking and scraping against the metal. His 4 eyes swept across the assembled delegates before fixing on the human section. The Vorthin ultimatum expires in 7 days, Kavies announced. The humans have not responded to our demands. They have not begun evacuating the disputed colonies. This is unacceptable. The Vorthin Collective is mobilizing its full military fleet. We will take those worlds by force. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. A bird-like ambassador from a distant system raised one wing tentatively. Perhaps further negotiation would be wise, the bird creature suggested carefully. These disputes can often be resolved through compromise. KS's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Compromises for the weak. The Vorthons are strong. We take what we want. If the humans wish to keep their colonies, let them try to stop us. This was too much for Giwan. Despite Han's restraining hand on her shoulder, she stood up. Her voice rang clear across the chamber. Prime QVAs, you're making a terrible mistake. Humanity does not want war. We prefer peace. But history shows what happens when peaceful species are pushed too far. I urge you to reconsider your ultimatum. Kavis turned his attention fully to Giwan. His alien features were hard to read, but she sensed mockery in his posture. History? You speak of history? The Vorthins have conquered 40 systems. We have the most powerful fleet in this sector. What history do you offer in comparison? The Calric's Empire, Giwan said firmly. The chamber went completely silent. Delegates froze in their seats. Even Kivier seemed taken aback by the name. Ancient myths, Kivier said dismissively. Old stories told to frighten children. Thresh suddenly stood up, his old body shaking slightly. His voice carried across the chamber with surprising strength. It is not a myth. I was there. Prime Kiviers. I was a citizen of the Calric's Empire. I watched your human embassy burn when Emperor Thane ordered the destruction of New Sol. I watched my empire's fleets shatter against human determination. I watched our homeworld fall in 3 days after ruling the galaxy for 8 centuries. KVAs waved one of his multiple arms dismissively. If this story is true, it only proves the Calrics were weak. We are not. The Calrics thought the same thing, Thresh said sadly. They believed their ancient strength made them invincible. They learned too late that age means nothing against adaptability. Please, Prime KVAs, I beg you, as someone who lost everything. Withdraw your ultimatum. Do not make our mistake. But KVAs had already made up his mind. Guan could see it in his posture, in the set of his mandibles. He saw himself as strong and humanity as weak. Nothing anyone said would change that perception. The Vorthan fleet will begin its advance in 7 days, KVAs declared. Any species that interferes will be considered hostile. This council is dismissed. As the chamber emptied, Guan felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She had tried to warn them, but arrogance had made KVAs deaf to reason. Just like Emperor Thane before him, Ambassador Hyun stood beside her, his expression calm, but his eyes hard. He pulled out a secure communication device and entered a private frequency. When the connection activated, he spoke just 3 words that Guan would never forget. Wake the fleet. The week passed slowly. Guan watched the Galactic Council dissolve into nervous tension as the Vorthan deadline approached. Many delegates left the station entirely, not wanting to be present when the conflict began.
Others
stayed morbidly curious to see what would happen when the Vorthans challenged humanity. Ambassador Hyun remained calm throughout it all, conducted his regular diplomatic duties, attended meetings, and filed reports as if nothing unusual was happening. But Guan noticed small changes. Secure communications arrived and departed from the human embassy at all hours. Military personnel in civilian clothing began appearing in the corridors, and Han spent long hours in private conversations with people whose faces never appeared on the video screens. On the 6th day, Guan found Thresh sitting alone in one of the station's observation lounges. The old Kelrix was staring out at the stars, his reptilian features etched with sorrow. She sat down beside him without asking permission. You tried to warn them, Guan said softly. I tried, Thresh agreed. His voice sounded tired, ancient. Just as others tried to warn Emperor Thane, but some lessons must be learned through pain rather than wisdom.
Tell me
what it was like, Guan said, when the Calrix Empire fell. I've heard Ambassador Hyun's version, but he saw it from the human side. What did your people experience? Thresh was silent for a long moment, his golden eyes distant with memory. Pride, he finally said. That's what we felt at first. Pride in our empire's strength, in our centuries of dominance. When the humans first refused our demands, we laughed. When they declared war, we were amused. A young species, barely capable of traveling between stars, challenging the mighty Kelrix. When did you realize you were wrong? Too late, Thresh said bitterly. After we had lost a dozen battles, destroyed hundreds of their ships, killed millions of their people. We thought we were winning. But each victory cost us more while they learned from each defeat. By the time we understood what we faced, momentum had already shifted. The humans were no longer defending, they were attacking. He turned to look directly at Guan. Do you know what frightened us most? Not their weapons or their tactics, it was their eyes. When you looked at a human soldier, you saw something that no Calrix had ever possessed. Absolute conviction. They believed they would win, even when they were losing.
out.
They never doubted, never wavered, never considered surrender. We lost many people in that war, Guan said quietly. Millions, Thresh acknowledged. But you turned that loss into fury, into determination. Every colony that Kelrix destroyed made humanity fight harder. Every ship you lost made your remaining forces more dangerous. It was like fighting a fire. The more you tried to stamp it out, the more it spread. Do you hate us? What asked. For what we did to your empire, Thresh considered the question carefully. No, he finally said. I understand now that the empire deserved what it received. We had become arrogant, cruel, blind to the suffering we caused. The humans taught us humility. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. I only regret that the Vorthons must learn the same lesson now. The 7th day arrived. The deadline expired at noon, station time. KVA's broadcast a message to the entire Galactic Council announcing that the Vorthon fleet was beginning its advance toward the disputed colonies. He repeated his claim that humanity would surrender without a fight, that they were too weak to oppose real power. Yuan stood in the embassy command center beside Ambassador Hyun, watching the tactical displays. The screen showed the Vorthan fleet, hundreds of warships moving in formation toward human space. They looked impressive, disciplined, confident in their superiority. Admiral Suyun is in position, reported one of the human officers monitoring the communications. She requests permission to engage. Hyun studied the displays carefully. Jiwon noticed that the tactical map showed something the Vorthons apparently did not see. Human ships, dozens of them, positioned in a perfect ambush formation around the advancing enemy fleet. They had been there all along, hiding in the shadows, waiting. "Tell Admiral Suyun to make contact first," Hyun said calmly. "Give them one final chance to withdraw." The officer relayed the message. Moments later, Jiwon heard the Admiral's voice over the communication system. Admiral Suyun sounded young, perhaps in her 40s, but her tone carried absolute authority. "Warthon Fleet, this is Admiral Suyun of the Human Defense Forces. You are entering restricted space with hostile intent. I am authorized to use any and all measures to defend human territory. This is your final warning. Turn back now, or face the consequences." The response from the Vorthan fleet came quickly. It was KVA's himself, his clicking voice full of contempt. "Human vessels detected. Your numbers are insignificant. Surrender now and we will allow you to evacuate peacefully. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Hyun closed his eyes briefly, as if in resignation or perhaps prayer. When he opened them again, his expression had hardened into something cold and final. "Admiral Suyun," he said clearly, "they have made their choice. You are authorized to engage. Show them what the Calrics learned." "Understood, Ambassador. Beginning engagement now." The tactical displays erupted with activity. The human ships that had been hiding powered up their systems simultaneously. Their energy signatures blazed across, the scanners revealing their true numbers and their true nature. These were not civilian vessels or converted freighters. These were advanced warships, designed and built with all the lessons humanity had learned from the Calrics War. G1 watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded on the screens. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, striking the Vorthon formation from multiple angles. Their weapons tore through Vorthon shields as if they weren't there. Their ships moved faster, turned sharper, and fought with a precision that made the Vorthon fleet look slow and clumsy by comparison. Within minutes, dozens of Vorthon ships were disabled or destroyed. The remainder broke formation, trying to scatter and regroup. But the human fleet anticipated every move, cutting off escape routes and herding the enemy ships together. "Vorthon, Command is broadcasting a retreat order," reported the communications officer. "Prime Kivios is demanding his fleet withdraw immediately." But the Vorthon fleet commanders had already committed to the attack. Pride or perhaps fear of appearing weak drove them forward. They continued fighting, even as their numbers dwindled. Admiral Suyun's voice came across the communication system again, calm and professional. "Vorthon fleet, stand down, power down your weapons, and prepare to be escorted to neutral space. If you continue fighting, we will be forced to destroy every ship." Some of the Vorthon vessels obeyed, shutting down their systems and drifting in place. Others fought on, either too proud or too committed to surrender. The human fleet dealt with them efficiently, disabling their engines and weapons with surgical precision. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it ended, the Vorthon fleet was in ruins. More than half their ships were destroyed or crippled. The survivors sat motionless in space, surrounded by human warships that had barely taken any damage at all. Gaewon looked at the tactical display in shock. The Vorthon Collective had claimed to have the most powerful fleet in the sector. They had conquered 40 systems, and humanity had crushed them in less time than a lunch break. "Send a message to Prime KVAs," Haeon said quietly. "Tell him we're ready to discuss terms for peace." The next day, the Galactic Council reconvened. The chamber was packed with delegates, all of them eager to see what would happen. KVA stood at the central podium again, but his posture was completely different now. His mandibles hung slack, his multiple arms trembled slightly. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been fear or shame. The The Vorthan Collective accepts full responsibility for this conflict, Kavas said, his voice hollow. We withdraw all claims to the disputed territories, accept humanity's terms for peace. Ambassador Heon stood up to address the council. Gaiwan noticed that every delegate in the chamber was watching him with a mixture of respect and fear. Humanity accepts the Vorthan surrender, Hyun said formally. We require complete demilitarization of the Vorthan fleet. All warships will be disarmed and placed under neutral observation. The Vorthan Collective will pay reparations for damages caused during this conflict. In return, humanity guarantees the security of Vorthan territory and the safety of the Vorthan people. It was the same deal humanity had offered the Calrics 89 years ago. The terms were harsh but not cruel. The Vorthans would survive, diminished but alive. After the council session ended, KVOs approached Jiwon in the corridor. His four eyes looked at her with an expression that might have been pleading. Why didn't you warn us properly? He asked. Why didn't you show us your true strength before it came to war? Jiwon thought about how to answer. She remembered everything Haeon had taught her, everything she had learned about the Calrics' war and humanity's history. We did warn you, she said gently, many times, but you weren't listening.
Atchiborn.
Sometimes people only hear warnings after they've already felt the consequences. Kovas clicked his mandibles softly, a sound of distress in his species. What happened to the last species that challenged humans? Now I know. Now the whole galaxy will know again. He turned and walked away, his movements slow and defeated. Gyuan felt a mixture of pity and relief. The Vorthons had learned their lesson, just as the Calrics had before them. Thresh found her later that evening. The old Calrics looked tired but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Thank you, he said simply. For what? Juan asked, confused. For trying to prevent it? For giving them every chance to turn back. The humans I remember from the war would have destroyed the Vorthan fleet completely. But your people have changed. You're still strong, still dangerous when provoked, but you've learned mercy too. Juan thought about this. We learned from the Calrics' war that winning isn't enough. You have to win in a way that lets everyone move forward afterward. Wise words, Thresh said. Perhaps the galaxy is fortunate that humans learned that lesson. A species with your abilities and no restraint would be truly terrifying. We could rule the galaxy by force if we wanted, Jiwon admitted, but we don't want that. Peace is harder than war, but more rewarding. Thresh nodded slowly. Then perhaps there is hope. Not just for the Vorthans or the scattered Calrics, but for all of us. As long as someone is strong enough to keep the peace, but wise enough not to abuse that strength. Later that night, Jiwon stood alone in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars. She thought about all the species out there, all the civilizations trying to coexist in this vast galaxy. And she thought about humanity's role in it all. Not conquerors, not victims, but guardians who had learned their lessons the hard way. Somewhere out there, on some Vorthan world, children would grow up hearing stories about what happened when their leaders challenged humanity. They would learn the same lesson the Calrics' children learned before them. Be peaceful when you can, be strong when you must, but never mistake patience for weakness. And the galaxy would remember, as it always remembered, what happened to the last species that challenged humans.